Barabbas was one of the insurrectionists. It seems the crowd, the mob, was filled with those who would have supported this insurrection against Rome and Pilate. And they were not with Jesus, right? Jesus said his kingdom was not of this world. Barabbas was a rebel and a murderer, just like the mob, screaming for his release and Jesus' death. Hey guys, welcome to the video this week. Out here going for a little hike, a little walk, and that's a beautiful day. Missed a couple weeks of videos, so thought I'd better get out and do this. Anyways guys, today's Bible passage is continuing from where we left off in the book of Mark. But last week, let's just recap, so it was actually a couple weeks ago, we read about Pilate's amazement, right? His amazement that Jesus' reaction to the charges that have been unjustly brought about him, right? Pilate realized that Jesus was an innocent man, and also that Jesus' reaction was not that of anyone he had ever seen before him. And it left Pilate amazed, as Mark wrote. And today we're going to read about the final conviction of Jesus, brought about not by justice, but by mob rule and politics. Although above it all was a sovereign God whose plans for our salvation would not be thwarted. And Jesus had the power to lay down his life, as he said, and he also has the power to take it up again. But before we read today's Bible passage, I want you to think about these two questions. Number one, why did Pilate release Jesus? Why did he release Jesus? Or sorry, why didn't he? Why did he not release Jesus? Think about that. He could have. Why didn't he? Number two, why did the crowd want to release Barabbas, a murderer, instead of Jesus? They were given a choice, and they chose Barabbas. Why did they do that? Anyways, guys, think about those two questions. So we take a walk here and read today's Bible passage. Well, we start in verse 6 of chapter 15. We're going to go to verse 15. Here's what it says. Now at the feast he used to release for them any one prisoner whom they requested. The man named Barabbas had been imprisoned with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the insurrection. The crowd went up and began asking him to do as he had been accustomed to do for them. Pilate answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over, Jesus they're talking about, had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. Answering again, Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with him, the one you call the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify, crucify him." But Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." Wishing to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Well, that's the passage for today, guys, and as we can see, politics and mob rule are at work here, right? Just like some of our corrupt political leaders today, Pilate was more interested in placating a mob who was about to riot instead of upholding justice, right? Pilate knew that Jesus wasn't guilty and even asked the angry mob for a reason when they screamed for Jesus to be crucified, right? Why? What evil has he done? Pilate knew he had done nothing wrong, right? And he even says this to the mob. But just like mobs and rioters, from all times in history, they had no reasoned response for Pilate. They only had louder screams. Crucify him, right? That's what they kept screaming. And this brings us to the first question I asked you to consider. Why didn't Pilate just release Jesus then? He knew he was innocent. Well, it's the same reason that our leaders today refuse to uphold justice in the face of violent opposition. They're cowards. They seek power and control, and they seek it over justice. Oh wow, guys, check this out. That's a black cockatoo up there. Take a pause for a sec. That's pretty amazing to get that close to one. Let's see if we can sneak up on him. Wow, that's amazing. One of God's creatures, right? Look at that. Beautiful bird. See in the tree? I'll see if I can flip the camera around so you can see him. There he is up there, eating some branches or something. Wow, that's pretty cool. You usually can't get this close to them when they fly away. The black cockatoos in the wild like this. That's amazing, right? Pretty cool. He looks like he's eating some bark. Oh, there he goes. Well, anyways, guys, that was pretty cool. You don't usually see that all the time when you're at, usually they're way up high, but that was pretty neat to see it that close. And anyways, guys, let's continue where we left off before we saw that awesome creation there of God, that black cockatoo. They're pretty cool birds. But yeah, question was, why didn't Pilate release Jesus, right? Well, hey, it's the same reason that our leaders today refuse to do this and uphold justice. Right? When they're faced with violent opposition, they're cowards, right? Really, they're just seeking, just like Pilate, who was seeking power and control. Pilate knew what the moral and just thing was to do, and yet he gave in to the mob, to the crowd. Although he did get a last few digs in against the religious leaders who had whipped up the crowd and forced his hand in releasing Barabbas, right? When Pilate said this, he said, "Then what shall I do with him who you call King of the Jews," right? He knew that this wouldn't help to have the crowd change their minds, but Pilate did know that it would irritate the religious leaders whom Pilate knew were having Jesus crucified, just as the passage said, because out of envy and nothing more, right? And that brings us to the second question to ask you to consider. Why did the crowd want to release Barabbas, a murderer? So there was a clue in the passage, right, when it says that Barabbas was one of the insurrectionists. It seems the crowd was filled with those who would have supported this insurrection against Rome and Pilate, and they were not with Jesus, who said that his kingdom was not of this world, right? Barabbas was a rebel. He was a murderer, just like this mob screaming for his release and Jesus' death. And in the end, Pilate saw this as a way of escaping from an awkward situation, right? The mob saw it as a chance of getting their hero back, Barabbas. And the chief priests saw it as a chance of getting a death sentence for Jesus. So it seems the crowds, the chief priests got their way, and Pilate rendered a purely political decision instead of administering justice. But above all, everyone, we all know God is sovereign, and his plans for our salvation would continue just as he had said. Just as he had said, right, through his prophet Isaiah, 500 or 700 years or so before this event even took place. And we can read in Isaiah 53, verse 3, it says, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not." Amazing, right? Prophet Isaiah knew of Jesus, this suffering servant would come over 700 years before, and it's written down for us. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and God willing, I will see you again next time. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video this week, and remember, true knowledge is meant to be shared. So go out and tell a friend, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 friends what you learned about this week, and God willing, I will see you next time.